Readers, you have become experts on stories, and you know that in stories, characters encounter trouble. And as the story evolves, the trouble becomes worse and worse. You're already aware that in historical fiction, there is usually trouble brewing in the world. Here's the thing though, stories develop around trouble that is not only external in the world, but that is also internal within the people. I have a theory about the trouble that is often at the heart of historical fiction, and I hope we can test this theory today with Patrol and with your novels. This is my theory. The protagonists in historical fiction are complex people, defined by a constellation of character traits. Often in a story, one of those traits becomes especially important to the story because that trait doesn't fit easily into the demands or the expectations of the historical era. It's almost as if that trait becomes particularly significant because it collides with the historical era. That is, the character's trait and the expectations of the era clash with each other in ways that cause tension. And the tension that results becomes the central conflict in the story. Are you willing to test the theory out? Let's start by rereading, and then I'll read on in the story. Whenever you go back to a story after not reading for a while, it helps to reread, even just to skim. That's a way to remind yourself of what happened in the story. For now, we want to recall what we have said about the soldier's traits, to listen for new evidence about the kind of person this is, and to think especially about whether some of the soldier's traits might end up colliding with the role that he is given to play in the Vietnam War. The land of my enemy has wide valleys, mountains that stretch along the far horizon, rushing brown rivers, and thick green forest. Suddenly, there is silence. We are afraid to move. We are more afraid not to move. I hear the sounds of the birds again. I wonder if they speak of us from the high branches. I wonder if what they see makes them sad. I am so afraid. I want the enemy to be more afraid. I want him to tremble more than I tremble. The radio crackles in my hand as I call for bombs. Still we wait. Then we are startled by the sound of planes. We look up at them and see their shadows spreading over the valley's edge toward us. They pass us and do their work. The bombs explode, rumbling like thunder at a distance that is never distant enough. My body shakes. I tell myself that I will not die on this bright day. Against the horizon, columns of blue-gray smoke rise. 2 clicks away, there are flashes of gunfire. 2 clicks in the distance of my enemy. My chest tightens. I wipe my sweaty palms. I bite back my tears. We move again. We are always moving. My legs ache, my shoulders sag, my 1,000 eyes look for death in the waving bamboo fields. A village. It is our target. We circle it. We swing around, sweeping our gun sights along the windows and the huts. We rush in behind the hollow bombing of grenades. Secure the village, a sergeant calls. He points toward the enemy. Readers, listen to this next part closely. It's fascinating how he talks about the enemy. See what you learn about him. The enemy, the brown woman with rivers of age etched deeply into her face. An old man, his eyes heavy with memory. And babies. Babies. Little enemies crying on the mud roads. Little enemies with tears running down dusty cheeks. Readers, what are the important character traits that you've seen in this soldier? And is there one that you think will collide with the requirements, the expectation of the character's role in history? Take a second and pause the video and take some notes, jot some notes in your reader's notebook. Did you notice how the soldier doesn't just notice the land around him? He notices the people too. He notices they are old men and old women and babies. And you may have even thought he describes these people who are supposed to be his enemies as even like he's sympathetic with them. It must be really hard to be as sympathetic and as sensitive as this guy is when you're trapped in a war like this. He sees beauty in that land and in the people. He says, a brown woman with rivers of age etched deeply into her face, an old man, his eyes heavy with memory. What's the problem for him? They are the enemy. He isn't supposed to like them. He's got to kill them. Let's read on, and will you be especially alert to how traits you've already uncovered and others that emerge in the next part of the story might cause trouble for this character because of the historical conflict he is caught up in. But I know there are other enemies. They are strong and young. I am strong and young. The others, they are the real enemy. They have dogs that bark at danger and wooden bowls that hold a day's rice, and grandmothers who stand sullen at their huts. This is my enemy. Wow, how he describes the enemy. Remember earlier, readers, when we talked about how a person sees something shows so much about a person? Listen again. An old man, his eyes heavy with memory, babies, little enemies crying on the mud roads. What's the most specific vocabulary you have to describe the character traits of this soldier? Think about that. Readers, let me give you some feedback. Mostly we are talking about this soldier having a gentle soul, being like a poet, noticing beauty. Traits like those. I want to remind you that we have all agreed that this is also a soldier who is fearful, and we could give text references to support that. I want you to notice, however, that we are not talking about the fact that he is fearful. This is true, but it is less important in this discussion than the fact that he is sympathetic. Can you figure out why? Why are we sort of all agreeing that the central tension in this story seems to revolve around the fact that this soldier is sensitive? He is a gentle soul. Can you try to put words to why the sensitivity, not the fear, is what we are talking about? Readers, remember the question we are investigating today is whether the protagonist has a character trait or several, that collide with the demands of his era, with the requirements of the historical context. It's hard to be afraid and to be a soldier, but fear is probably a part of being a soldier. Probably most soldiers are afraid. That is something war creates often. But this character is also sensitive, and the trait of being sensitive wasn't created by the war and is probably not common to most soldiers. The fact that the boy is sensitive is a personal trait. He sees the beauty and humanity of his enemy. And yes, that puts him in conflict with his role. Here he is in the story, caught in a forest where he's supposed to kill these people. In the next video, we're going to finish this story. Make sure that you have your notebook ready, that you're thinking and jotting as you're listening. And when you're done, we'll reflect and gather up our information.